Raad Alkadiri, managing partner at 31032 Associates. Raad, I wanted to ask you if you would, as a kickoff point, for us far away in the outer reaches of the Roman Empire, and looking back at all you citizens in the luxury of Rome, can you tell me how we should think about the events yesterday, last night in Arizona, the memorial for the slain conservative or conservative talking, or whatever the word is for what his position, the founder of Turning Point USA, I suppose, is one of his sort of titles. But MAGA seems to have its first saint. How should we, from this distance, digest this moment, this event last night in particular, not the assassination a week ago, which clearly was a traumatic political assassination of some sort, but what about the event last night in a football stadium memorializing this man?
I think it gives you an indication on one level of some of the rhetoric and some of the heated rhetoric that sort of is characterizing the US right now. I think there's been an effort by MAGA, obviously, sort of along with its outrage, along with its sense of deep unease about this, to sort of rally around this message of Charlie Kirk and what he represented, and seeing Charlie Kirk as representative of the attack, the murder of him being sort of an attack on MAGA more generally. I think there's a certain amount of cynicism that goes with it. That it isn't as I say, that sense of anger, that sense of sorrow, that sense of outrage isn't real. But nonetheless, it's being, I think, carefully played as a way of sort of playing to that crowd and playing to the mob, in terms of the deep, very visceral feeling that's there. So yes, it has its first martyr. MAGA has its first saint, if you want, but I think it goes to a much deeper sort of issue, and that is the degree of polarization and the rhetoric and the policies that come with that. America is a very, very divided country right now. One would argue dangerously so. And events like last night probably do nothing to calm the political mood and the political temperature, rather just exacerbates it and is sort of another step on the way to something that could be rather dangerous.
Look, if I might just follow up on that, because what it also seems to be, and I wanted you to speak of it because I think this sort of gives us a wider sense of relevance, and that is that this assassination of Charlie Kirk, who I have to admit I was barely aware of a week ago, as a person and as a movement. But in all of the noise that has come out in the interim, it seems that rather than it being a unifying moment for MAGA, it seems to highlight some of the fractures within MAGA, and Charlie Kirk, as I've seen, some sort of questioning some of the holy grail things of, let's say, the attachment to Israel from the point of view of the United States. He was starting to question we're seeing Marjorie Taylor Greene now sort of create some of the, seen her in alignment with some left thinking podcast shows and so forth, that it does seem that there are fractures here in MAGA land, that this moment with Charlie Kirk has highlighted, rather than it being a unified tent. Your thoughts on that, and if that is a correct reading, and if it's relevant or not?
I think it's sort of what you're asking points to something sort of broader. I mean, the MAGA movement, or the Trump movement, if you want to sort of call it, is a fairly broad tent. And there have always been tensions within it between different sort of factions who have different priorities. Donald Trump sits as the sort of conductor of a sort of rather discordant orchestra. And I think, over time, particularly as policy, I mean, particularly as you move from opposition to power, you start to move from a situation where sort of everything is rhetoric to sort of things starting to become reality, and the tensions in that movement are there. I don't think any of those people are going to break with the president right now. They're just willing to be critical about certain areas of policy. But I think, they also stand sort of very firmly in a camp that is far, far away from, the Democratic camp in the United States. And, they are, you have battling on that island just as you have battling on the other. The really key point is that they are.
Raad, back to the big tent of the MAGA big tent. It seems that in this big tent is Netanyahu and his vision for the Middle East, green light to do whatever he wants, and also in the tent is Putin to do whatever he wants. Does that present any fractures as we now see Putin, it would appear, advancing his reach into the Baltics, into Poland, with current in the last few days and week, the sort of violation of airspace, drones actually falling out of the sky, shot out of the sky in Poland. Your thoughts on those two major geopolitical faults lines, fractures, power in the MAGA tent, Netanyahu and his vision, Putin and his vision, and now Putin taking that into the Baltics. Is this going to fracture, or is he going to stay happy in the MAGA tent?
I think that's less about the MAGA tent and more about the president and more about how the White House feels about things. I mean, in terms of the MAGA tent, again, there's a schism within the MAGA tent regarding what America first means. Should America involve itself in international war? Should it become more isolationist? Should it become, more unilateral? And that's the debate you're seeing. Is it in Washington's interest, or what is Washington's interest from engaging in a European war? What does it matter, and why would US resources and US efforts be sort of placed into that? That is a European issue, and they should deal with it themselves. So I think that's the way to understand it, as opposed to whether there's a place for Putin. And the reality is that, the president has tried in his inimitable way to sort of engineer some sort of outcome on repeated occasions right now, and has failed to rein in Vladimir Putin and has failed to rein in the
Which is
Russians.
obviously, I mean, in one level, Putin's calling it's the bluff, right? It's the taco. Putin has never believed that Trump was ever, other than "I'm disappointed" words. There's no backing. There's no sort of red line point that Putin believes Trump's going to descend on him, and so.
And that speaks to sort of a lack of joined up thinking when it comes to foreign policy and when it comes to security policy. And, the emphasis on transactionalism. One could argue that sort of Trump's greatest interest in Ukraine is being able to be this peace president that will get him a sort of a Nobel Peace Prize. Beyond that, it's hard to see sort of what the strategic thinking is, if there is any at all, about sort of the long-term US-European relationship and the long-term national security and stability picture in Europe. Israel's a little different. I mean, I think, it's very clear that this administration isn't going to break with Israel no matter what. And the personal relationship between Trump and particularly between Jared Kushner, when he was, the eminence grise advising on Middle East issues, was very close. There is a sympathy for Israel on the US right that really sees Israel as being able to do no wrong. And there are times when you just feel that the United States doesn't want to engage, or this administration certainly, because it's too messy and there's nothing to be gained. So,
But just back to the Putin piece, isn't, I mean, we've seen in recent days the push by supposed push by Trump to get the Europeans to enforce greater sanctions on Russian oil flows. And there is a bill in the House, in the Senate, that is basically limiting Trump's ability to give too many gifts to Putin. That they are. Can you just speak to that? The Senate's influence on Trump's limited ability to push to be too generous to Putin, and that there is this sanction on the potential for oil flows that the Senate is threatening all the
Look, I
time.
think there is no doubt that, across the political spectrum in the United States, and that includes on the right as well, there are those who are hawks on Russia, and there are those who feel that, there need to be tougher measures on Russia. The reality is, though, that this is an imperial presidency, sort of far more so than sort of many that have come before. And one that, so when it comes to foreign policy, as other policies, believes that it has the mandate to take the decisions that it takes and push them through, irrespective of convention, irrespective of the courts, and in some cases, irrespective of the Constitution. And so, those are limiting factors on the margin. Yes, Trump has talked about, if the US puts tariffs on China and India, sorry, if Europe puts tariffs on China and India, the US will follow. And then a week, 10 days later, you get a phone call between the president and Narendra Modi, where everything is hunky-dory again. India is doing exactly as it pleases, exactly the right thing, and that comes down to transactionalism over tariffs and everything else. So I think it's an order of priority in terms of president's mind. It's about short-term gain in the president's mind, and he's not going to be constrained too much by what the Senate says. But that doesn't mean that you aren't going to continue to get from within the MAGA organization or the right more generally, or across the political spectrum, different views on foreign policy issues. That's a traditional part of US politics.
Out of that. I mean, that in itself is a snap moment, isn't it, Rad? I mean, if you're raising or lowering interest rates as inflation rises and you're breaking the dollar, is the dollar the snap that we're seeing? 120, $30,000 Bitcoin tells you that the dollar has already snapped. It's worthless according to the price of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess my view is stop waiting for a snap. It's going to happen, and it's going to be a gradual erosion, and not that gradual. I mean, it's an interesting question of a snap for geopolitics or sort of geoeconomics
I
and
mean, we nearly
markets.
saw a snap in early April, didn't we, when the tariffs were announced and the bond markets went bonkers for a few days. It was a bit like a Liz Truss moment, and then it kind of got sobered up when we stepped back from the cliff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the risk is a slightly different one, Sean. I think the risk is that this happens over a period of time. It's the frog in the saucepan moment. And if you look at where we are compared to where we were when this administration came into office, it looks like a very different world, geopolitically and geoeconomically. Trade has been disrupted. You've had disruptions to sort of, globalization. You've had disruptions to the international standards that have been there for decades. You have crises that are breaking out all over the world. You've had the US bomb Iran. You can keep going through the list of issues. And I think, this is a system that's in transition. This is a US administration that is seeking to sort of introduce a paradigm shift in geopolitics.